الله أكبر حي على الصلاة الله أكبر.
You know what I'll do is I will quote a chapter from, I quote a verse from one of our chapters in the Most Holy Quran. The quote goes that when the will of man and the will of Allah are one, resurrection is a fact. The reason that I make this statement is a friendly reminder of who we are tied to and who we are connected to. All right? The plight of not just the Moorish Science Temple of America, but any Asiatic organization in America is to reconnect the relationship with the Most High and we Asiatics living on the plane of manifest. Part of the reason why we're in this fallen state is because we have debased ourselves. We have debased ourselves for many different reasons. Inshallah, I may go into this later on in my measure. But what I want you all to remember is that we are a spirit and a part of Allah. And the only thing, as simple as it seems, and for it to be very simple, it still seems so difficult, is to submit your will to Allah. If we submit our will to Allah, I can guarantee you that we will be on the path of salvation, on the straight path of salvation, on the clear path of salvation, the Sirat al-Mustaqim. It mentions in page 3 in our Moorish Holy Quran to know thyself and thy Father God Allah. So our Prophet Noble Ali, the Redeemer, gave us a hint of what will be in store, or what's in store for us reading this pamphlet that was divinely prepared. That we have to get back in line with not only knowing ourselves, but with knowing Allah, to submitting our will to Allah. That's the only way you're going to raise the dead. That's the only way we're going to be raised up from the conscious of being the Negro, or the conscious of being the black person, the person with no identity, with no culture. It's the only way. Resurrection is a fact. The key to purity is death. Let me break that down real quick, because it states in the Moorish Holy Quran that the man has to go through a period of death where his body will be set asunder. And he said that is death. I'm paraphrasing. That's in the further on in the chapters. I want to say chapter 17 or chapter 18, when it deals with the resurrection of Jesus, where he talks about the idea of man being resurrected. So trust me when I say the path to purity, ultimate purity itself, is this concept of death. Because we have to remember that death is not an enemy to man, he's a friend. All right? So what am I saying, Sheik? We have to kill off our old habits. We have to kill off our old thoughts. Once we kill off the old habits, the old thoughts, our Prophet tells us to remove ourselves from European psychology. European psychology, and again, I'm going to get into that a little later on in my measure. European psychology is attributed to putting us in this state that we're in right now. Because we're not thinking like our forefathers. We're not being what our forefathers are without a doubt of contradiction. We're being what somebody else's forefathers are. And we only need to be ourselves. One of the keys in the Quran question is, how did Noble Ali begin to uplift the Moorish Americans? And the answer is by teaching them to be ourselves. So teaching us that part of being ourselves is understanding that we are spirit and part of Allah, and thus we have to submit to the will of Allah. That's what it means to be a Muslim. That's what it means to be a Muslim for those that want to be technical, our Arabic speaking people. So If we profess to be Muslims, to be one of peace, part of being a Muslim is submitting to the will of Allah. But we as Asiatics living in America today, because we have that European psychology, we have a problem with that. Because we think submission, or we have this idea of submission of being oppressed. Submission and oppression are two totally different things. We should know this. Out of all people in the world, we should know the difference between submission and oppression. But it's obvious because we're thinking with this form of European psychology that we still have it mixed up. So we have to remove the idea of us thinking we're going to be oppressed by Allah, because we should know Allah. We should know that this deity that we think of, that we know that exists, because we look at ourselves in the mirror and we look at my brother and my sister and we see Allah in ourselves, the air that we breathe, how we operate on the plane of manifest. Without a doubt or contradiction, there is a higher source that controls all of this. And he controls all of this by way of us on the plane of manifest. We should know without a doubt or contradiction that Allah exists. If we have any doubts about that, then that's a problem. Then we're going to continue to be debased. We're going to continue to be the descendants of Lucifer, Satan, devil, dragon, and beast. Aligning our will with the will of Allah is one of the first steps of salvation. It allows you to think clearly. It allows you to access the holy breath. It allows you to access the saving power that has been taught to us by our forefathers. It allows us to think clearly. It allows us to get into the mind state of our forefathers. That is something that we are not doing. Our problems, in the minor sense, is social and economical, but on a broader sense, they're moral and spiritual. So in order for us to alleviate these problems, we have to get back into a state of mind of morality and spirituality. And that's one and the same. Because if we get back into the spirit, if we get back into the frame of mind of being spiritual, we'll practice these customs and traditions that was conducive to bringing back our spirituality, which is our religion, which is, to the Moorish Americans, Islamism. Don't let anybody tell you you're just spiritual. Because if you're just spiritual and you're not practicing a way to align yourself with the Most High, then you have a problem. Even if you have your own particular form of religion, quote unquote, you have to have a way. Even if you're rocking crystals, if you're rocking the biggest crystal that's known to man, if every 5 minutes you have to say a chant, or even at a few times a day you sit to yourself and you meditate. That's a practice. That's a form. That's something that you do every single day to get closer to knowing yourself and the Most High. That's a religion. Don't let anybody tell you different. And I know I have to break down the difference between religion and dogma each and every time, at least once in my measure, because it's important, because we have to be reminded. A man needs a pattern in his life. So these patterns that we have, it's important that is to remind ourselves that we are, again, a spirit and a part of Allah. That we are destined as spirit and part of Allah to be in line with His will. Because other than that, we're killing ourselves. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Aligning yourself with the will, aligning your will with the will of Allah is going back to the mindset of your forefathers. That is the reason why it says in chapter 2, if I ask you what to study, I say study self. We're not telling you to go back because we just want you to know what your forefathers did. That it's cold-blooded that they built a few pyramids. It's cold-blooded that they built the Taj Mahal. It's cold-blooded that they were able to build up the aqueducts in Spain and so on and so forth. We're supposed to be able to take whatever history is teaching us about our forefathers and apply it to what our situation is right now. Knowing how they think. We go into the Passion text, which is also known as the Holy Bible. If we go into the Quran of Muhammad alayhi salam, then we know the spirit of our forefathers. We know what to do and what not to do. We know how they think. If we want to read the Constitution of the Iroquois Confederacy, that is the spirit of our forefathers. That is how they moved. The doctrines and the treaties are out there. They're not just out there to cite to sound cold-blooded. They're out there to cite so we know how our fathers move and we can hold ourselves accountable to these morals based upon the spirituality. Because that's how they govern themselves. They govern themselves because they made sure that their will was in line with the will of Allah. They established a culture. They established a state of being. They established a nation state. Therefore, they were prosperous because they had the mind of their forefathers. They made sure they thought about what their forefathers did. If we go into the Geechee culture down on the shores of South Carolina and Georgia, before they do anything, they consult their forefathers. Before they make a move about whether or not they're going to sell their property, whether or not they're going to keep their property, whether or not they're going to expand, whether they're going to do this, they get together and they have church. That's right, I said it, they have church. Because anywhere where a group of people are encircled and demonstrating a higher form of spiritual thought, that is church. So we have to get back into the mindset of our Asiatic forefathers to think clearly, because we're not thinking clearly. All of these problems that we're having, I can guarantee you, and this is without me sounding biased, if we go back to the state of our forefathers and the thoughts of our forefathers, these problems can be alleviated. I can guarantee you that. But we must first genuinely know ourselves. We must first genuinely know thyself and thy Father God Allah. And again, when the will of man and the will of Allah are one, resurrection is a fact. Islam family. This evening, I'm actually going to take a couple of steps back. My thoughts are as a sheik in the Moorish Science Temple of America, Temple number 19, and these are just my thoughts, is that we as a temple have a responsibility to remind our members, to remind our sympathizers and our guests what it is that we do, what it is that this Moorish Divine and National Movement is about. The reason that I say this is because we often lose sight, drawing from what our gracious brother Joseph in part had mentioned in that chapter. Sometimes our faith gets lost in belief, so on and so forth. Meaning that what we may perceive as our faith is actually, what we only believe in. To make sure that you all understand what I'm saying is that we have in our lives a point where we have a belief in something, or where we think we have a strong support in something. And when the tide turns, things fail, we fall back. We revert back into our old ways, into our old thoughts, so on and so forth.
Islam.
So we think we have that faith. We think we have what man knows is truth. But in all actuality, we only perhaps think that this thing is true, that this Moorish Divine and National Movement is true. And I often think to myself that a part of this, not all of it, but a part of it is because we lost sight of what this movement is about, or we lose sight of what this movement is about and what we're supposed to do in this movement. Islam? So, my first question is, what is the purpose of the Moorish Science Temple of America?
Uplift fallen humanity.
Uplift fallen humanity. All right. Expound on that. What does that mean? How are we to do that?
Well, teaching them to know about their internal selves, the higher self, the lower self, and how they interact with people around them, family, children, community, and constantly going back to paying attention to the things that may be struggles, character defects, behavioral defects that may not be good examples for children to see, anybody in the community to see, and keep on refining and working on it to make it better.
Stop. I'm going to read in part a verse from chapter 1, Creation and Fall of Man. And you all can highlight it. Again, I'm just going to read it in part. It's a verse towards the end. And it reads, "Man is the Lord of all plane of manifest, protopast, of mineral, of plant, of beast. But he gave up his birthrights just to gratify his lower self. But man will regain his lost estate, his heritage. But he must do it in a conflict that cannot be told in words. He must suffer trials and temptations manifold. But let him know that the cherubim and the seraphim that rule the stations of the sun and the spirit of the mighty Allah, who rule the solar stars, are his protectors and his guide, and they will lead to victory." Islam? I also want to read further down. "Man cannot die. The spirit man is one with Allah. And while Allah lives in man, or while Allah lives, man cannot die. When man has conquered every foe upon the plane of soul, the sea..." Well, actually, let me stop right there. Man cannot die. The spirit man, man is one with Allah, and while man lives in man, while Allah lives, man cannot die. Let me stop right there. I'm going to go to chapter 2, instruction 19. Actually, I'm going to do 15 through 19, pardon yourself. 15, "A mighty work is theirs, for carnal men want not the light, they love the dark, and when the light shines in the dark, they comprehend it not. We call these sons revealers of the light, but they must have the light before they can reveal it. And you must teach your sons and set their souls on fire with love and holy zeal, and make them conscious of their missions to the sons of men. Teach them that Allah and man are one, but through carnal thoughts, words, and deeds, man tore himself away from Allah and debased himself. Teach that the holy breath would make them one again, restoring harmony and peace." The Moorish Science Temple of America is an institution that promotes the ideals and the actions of Moorish Americans. It is an institution that is here to act as a collective representation of the interests of the Moorish Americans and the Asiatics that live in America. That is what this institution is about. We have to go back during the time of Reconstruction and see that during that period, it is even stated that the so-called free or emancipated slaves, even though they were emancipated, a good portion of them didn't know how to conduct themselves in a life outside of servitude, outside of slavery. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. It's important that we remember, with all due respects to all Asiatics living in America, that we suffer a certain degree of that Stockholm Syndrome. Why do I say that? One of the reasons is because we still adhere to the principles and concepts of European psychology. Moorish Science Temple of America is an institution that is dedicated to putting you back in the mind state of your forefathers. Because it's not until we get into the mind state of our forefathers that we will truly raise ourselves up to a higher conscious, and with a higher conscious, we establish a nation state, a Moorish American nation state, within these United States of America, being citizens, having the mind state of a citizen. See, a lot of us don't have a mindset of what it means to be a citizen. We know what it means to live in America or to reside in America, to be domiciled in America, but we don't have any idea, or most of us don't have any idea what it means to have the responsibilities, not just the rights, but the responsibilities of being an American citizen. The Moorish Science Temple of America, that is part of our plight, to raise up the Asiatic to Moorish American citizens. All right? In my digital travels throughout the week, I came across this article, and pardon me if I'm late. Sometimes I have a tendency to be late in certain things. There was a video article or a segment about an ideal called BIE, Black Identity Empowerment? Extremists. Black Identity Extremists. And that raised the red flag. I was like, where did that come from? But it seems that there are certain, let's just say, private elements that are in place to sustain the progress of the Asiatic. And so what they do is they stamp or they tag an unnecessary concept to those who think their condition can be better. And it's called Black Identity Extremists. And when we look at that, let me write that down. I told myself I wasn't going to write on the board today.
All right, Sheik. They can see it, huh?
Black Identity Extremists. And what's interesting about this term is that it's a term that you can see was coined by someone that wanted to discourage, for lack of a better word, the progress of Asiatics living in America. Because what happens is that you have groups that are tired of seeing our people getting murdered out on the streets. You have Asiatics that live in parts of the world that are tired of seeing policemen that don't have any principles shoot down innocent Asiatics and bystanders in the streets. They are tired of misrepresentation by our government. They're tired of a poor education system. They're tired of not having these jobs and so on and so forth. They're tired of the cares of the world. If I can speak in a Moorish terminology. So what they do is they execute what they're familiar with. They go back to a point of their forefathers and they look up Marcus Garvey. They look up the Black Panthers. They look up these organizations who they think was just about holding up or protecting themselves. Let's do that. But there was more to protecting yourself than just holding arms. We have to remember that the brother Huey P. Newton was a college graduate.
That's right.
He had a PhD in psychology.
That's right.
We have to remember that the brother Fred Hampton was a 14, 15-year-old revolutionary.
That's right.
That united the Panthers in Chicago.
Come on now.
We have to remember, in addition to that, him being one of the youngest members of the Black Panthers.
That's right.
That he started programs to feed the hungry, to clothe those who had no clothes,
That's right.
to tutor children and adults for a higher education. But instead of chiming in and drawing from those demonstrations, the only thing they are thinking about is protection. Protection from being harmed. There comes a point in a person's mind when you're being oppressed that when all else fails, the only reaction is to defend. Doesn't care how you do it. I just don't want to get hurt no more. That is where our people are at this moment. It's to the point now where it's almost all forms of ration is out the window. I don't want to get choked anymore. I don't want my daughters getting assassinated in paddy wagons or while they're incarcerated. We're going into this. We're transitioning to a paradigm where there is going to be some conflict. The reason I say this is because it is our duty as Moorish Americans, those in the institution of the Moorish Science Temple of America, to make sure that the Asiatic does not get caught up in this black identity extremists.
That's right. It's a trap.
Because brothers that just want to defend their community, that want to make sure that the drugs are up off the streets, that want to make sure that their daughters and their sons and their wives can walk home safely, they get marked with this. And this is not even a demonstration. This is not even a demonstration on the term black. I'm not even worried about that. What I'm concerned with is the resurfacing of the COINTEL program. That is what I'm concerned with. And you have those that don't have the interest of the Asiatic in mind that'll resurface COINTEL just to set us off. Because they'll lock a brother up for 6 months to set the whole program off and then put him back on the streets. And while he's locked up for 6 months, they give whoever the ability to deter whatever plans and programs they have. Because it's not, they haven't even, this phrase, black identity extremists, was thought of by those that are in power, those who don't have the interests of the Asiatic involved, in mind. And they say, well, we got brothers and sisters that are on Facebook, that are on social media, other forms of social media, and they're showing guns, they're showing how their daughters can unassemble and reassemble a firearm, so on and so forth. And I'm not, let me make it clear, I'm not knocking the brothers and sisters that's doing it. But this is going back to what I was mentioning before, the mindset of our forefathers. Because our forefathers, we wouldn't have showed the plan. We wouldn't have showed the idea. If we are truly students of our foremothers and forefathers, let's keep it in the simple terms. If we read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and if we claim to be the masterminds, if you look at any Asiatic library, they have Sun Tzu, The Art of War.
Every one of them. Every one.
Where is it that Sun Tzu says, go on social media and tell your plan?
They don't say it. Nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found. But what he did say is that war and conflict is the final option. So if war and conflict is the final option, then what are we supposed to be doing until then? We're supposed to be checking ourselves, making sure that our situation is in order. Because if our situation is in order, then the only reason we will be compelled to war is if somebody comes in and infringes on that.
That's right.
But it's the difference between someone outside infringing upon our well-being and ourselves infringing upon our well-being. Because we're doing it to ourselves.
That's right.
It's on.
The Moorish Science Temple of America is not to be associated with any back to Africa movement.
It's on.
That is the words of our holy and divine prophet. Why is that? He does not like Africa? Of course he loves Africa. We are descendants of Africans and born in America.
It's on.
But we have to be clear that the Moorish Science Temple of America is a religious organization. But it does operate on political standards. We are the flagship, we are the representation of the Asiatic community, whether we want to admit it or not. All right. Therefore, we have to be diplomatic in all of our actions. All right. Moorish Science Temple of America, this Moorish Divine and National Movement, it is hinged upon building citizens. So, even though we're descendants of Africans, we're still descendants of Africans born in America. Therefore, we have to establish our well-being over here in these United States of America. And then we can worry about how we can support Africa. But we can't associate ourselves with any Back to Africa movement because, for one, they're on call. They're in the books.
That's right.
And again, so I'll make sure that I'm in law. I'm not disrespecting any organization.
That's right.
By any means.
That's right.
But what I am telling you about is what our responsibility is as Moorish Americans. And if you desire to become a member of the Moorish Science Temple of America, these are the things that you must know. Moorish Science Temple of America is to establish, the members of the Moorish Science Temple of America is to establish business.
Absolutely.
The Prophet tells us we must have a Rotarian complexion. In order for us to have a Rotarian complexion, Rotarians have to have businesses.
That's right.
So this isn't an organization that we come in and we get a feel-good service. You come in, you hear the sheiks come up to the rostrum and speak fire and brimstone about the prophet. All that is dope. It's cool. It's fine. That's what we're supposed to do. But we don't do it just to hear ourselves talk. We do it to inspire you to be great.
That's right.
To be greater. We're even doing it to inspire ourselves because it comes past our ears before it hits yours. So what goes into uplifting fallen humanity? The prophet tells us about that. He tells about us building better homes, finding jobs, making sure we feed those that are hungry, etc., etc. Make sure that we have a Moorish American and a Moabitist auxiliary. These are things, these are programs, these are committees that are put in place so that we can assure that when you go out there into the chaos of the world, that you have a strong, that we have a strong power, that we have a strong political power. And political, don't get spooked out of that word political power. Political power just means that you want to make sure that Kroger has a Moorish American section. That's it. Political power is making sure that that you have our city councilman come and visit us in the Moorish Science Temple of America every now and again. Right now, she's only visited us once, and that was to drop off some soap. To drop off some soap. All right. So we have to have a better political presence. But in order for us to do that, we have to give back to society. The prophet said we must receive and confer reciprocal helps and mutual obligations.
That's right.
So that, all of this is not just knowing that you're a Moorish American and saying that you're not Negro, Black, and colored. Our job as Moorish Americans is to make sure that any one of these brothers and sisters or organizations that's under these particular Black identity extremists is to introduce them to the prophet, Noble Ali. So they can say, well, so let them know that there's another way. And that your way won't work. What is it that the prophet says more? Your way won't work, but your way you will have.
Your way you will have, but your way will not work.
Islam. So, that was on my heart this evening. All praise are due to Allah. How's everyone feeling?
All right, all well.
Truly well. If you have a chance, I don't know how, if it's late or not, but we do have Moorish Remembrance Day. That is October the 14th of this year, 2018, in Philadelphia. Our brother, Sheik Brother Haliym-Bey and members of Temple 11 and other surrounding temples in Philadelphia will gather in fellowship, and they will speak upon the removal of the Moorish American, the term Moorish, or the names of the Moorish Americans, and being reduced to being called Negro over in Carpenter's Hall. They will give us a demonstration on that, a demonstration and a lecture on how that happened and what we need to do to remove those marks. Again, if you have a chance, come visit. We do have some solar returns this month. We have some Earth Days coming up. One in particular is our Grand Sheik Rashid Ibn. His Earth Day is on the 19th of October.
Islam.
Right?
I'll be 18.
I'll be 18. All praise to Allah. And then you have this handsome young fella at the rostrum, myself, Rashid Ibn Haliym-Bey, on the 17th. Again, all praise is due to Allah for us finding the Prophet and us being reborn. Technically, I am 7 years old. By way of the Prophet.
Allahu Akbar. حي على الصلاة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. حي على الصلاة.